It was Christmas Eve, the kind that used to fill my house with laughter, the smell of cinnamon, and the faint crackle of a record spinning in the corner. But that night, the air felt colder, even with the fire burning bright. Maybe because warmth isn't just heat. It's the kind of feeling that comes from knowing you belong. I stood by the window, holding a small gift wrapped in brown paper and tied with a red ribbon. My fingers had grown stiff over the years, and the ribbon wasn't as neat as it used to be. Still, I'd put my heart into that gift. It wasn't expensive, it wasn't shiny, but it meant something. Across the street, my son's house glowed like a scene from one of those glossy holiday movies. Cars lined the driveway, laughter spilled through the front door each time someone entered, and the sound of champagne glasses clinking carried into the night. I had been invited, of course, out of obligation more than anything. When I stepped inside, everything sparkled. The tree nearly touched the ceiling, covered in gold ornaments and white lights that shimmered like frost. There were trays of expensive food, candles that smelled like vanilla and pine, and a mountain of gifts stacked under the tree. "Mom, you made it," my son Ethan called out, hurrying over to take my coat. He looked handsome, older, sharper, but still my boy. His wife, Riley, appeared a moment later, tall and polished, tough, her lipstick the same shade as the wine in her glass. She smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "You're just in time. We were about to start opening gifts." I nodded, forcing my own smile. I wouldn't miss it. The room filled with chatter and the rustle of wrapping paper. Cameras flashed, people laughed too loudly, and then, as if it were part of a show, Ethan stood up and handed Riley's mother a set of keys tied with a silver bow. "Merry Christmas, Mom," he said proudly. "We hope you love it." Riley squealed, clutching the keys. "Oh my goodness, is this?" Ethan grinned. "A BMW, the new 7 Series, fully loaded." Applause broke out. Cameras clicked. Riley's mother covered her mouth, pretending to cry. And me? I stood there, holding my little brown paper package. No one looked my way. When the attention finally faded, Riley turned to me. "Oh, we have something for you too." She reached under the tree and handed me a tiny pink box. I opened it slowly. Inside was a ceramic piggy bank. Cute, childish, painted with glitter. Through the clear belly, I could see 3 crumpled $1 bills. "It's symbolic," Riley said lightly, sipping her wine. "You always told Ethan to save money, right? So, this is our way of reminding you that you taught him well." Laughter rippled through the room. My throat tightened, but I didn't say a word. I just smiled. "That's very thoughtful," I said softly, setting the box down on the table. Ethan looked uneasy for a second, but then the moment passed. The music swelled again. More toasts were made. And somewhere between the laughter and the sparkle of the lights, I realized something. This wasn't my family anymore. At least, not the way it used to be. I stayed another 20 minutes, long enough to finish my glass of cider, compliment the food, and help clear a few plates. Then, as the noise grew louder, I quietly slipped on my coat. No one noticed when I left. The night air bit at my cheeks as I stepped outside. Snow was falling, soft and steady, blanketing the world in silence. My car sat at the end of the driveway, dusted white. I brushed it off with my sleeve, started the engine, and sat there for a while, watching the house through the windshield. Inside, through the window, I could see Riley's mother laughing as she held up the BMW keys. Ethan leaned over to kiss his wife. The lights twinkled behind them like stars. I drove home slowly, the headlights cutting through the snow. The radio played Christmas music, cheerful and hollow. When I reached my little house, the one I'd lived in since Ethan was in grade school, I hung up my coat and stood in the doorway for a moment, listening to the quiet. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table, looking at the small pile of gifts I had wrapped for others. Simple things, made with love. A scarf I'd knitted for Ethan, a photo frame with a picture of him and his father when he was 5, a handmade ornament with the word faith carved into it. They were still sitting there, unopened. I picked up the ornament, running my thumb over the carved letters. My late husband used to say, "The best gifts are the ones no one can buy." He believed that kindness, patience, and love were currencies that never ran out, unless people chose to stop spending them. That night, I realized Ethan and Riley had stopped. I should have cried maybe, or felt anger, but instead, I just felt still, like a pond after a stone has sunk to the bottom. Around midnight, I stood by the window again. Outside, the snow glittered beneath the streetlight. Across town, I knew they were celebrating, drunk on laughter and pride. And here I was alone, but peaceful in a way I hadn't felt in years. I whispered into the quiet, "You wanted to show me my place, Riley. And you did." The kettle whistled softly behind me. I turned off the stove, poured another cup of tea, and sat down again. That was when I saw it, the old wooden box on the top shelf. I hadn't opened it in years. It held things that belonged to my husband, his watch, some photos, a few documents. But beneath those was a small envelope with Ethan's name on it, written in his father's handwriting. I held it gently, tracing the letters. Inside was a note Daniel had written before he passed. "For our boy, use this to start your life. Never forget the hands that built it for you." And attached to it, a property deed. The house Ethan lived in now, the house I had given him after Daniel's death. I smiled faintly. "You have no idea how much I've already given you," I whispered. The piggy bank still sat on the counter, catching the dim light from the window. I walked over, picked it up, and shook it gently. The coins clinked together, a hollow, mocking sound. Then I set it down, grabbed a notepad, and started writing. No anger, no revenge, just truth. By the time dawn began to break, I had made up my mind. Christmas had always been about giving. But maybe this year it was time they learned what that really meant. I folded the note carefully, sealed it, and slipped it inside a small box. Then from the drawer, I pulled out the keys to Ethan's house, the ones he didn't know I still had, and placed them on top. The snow outside had stopped falling. The world was quiet, waiting. I looked around my tiny kitchen, the tea still warm, the silence heavy but comforting. Then I whispered to myself, almost smiling, "Merry Christmas." And I knew exactly what I'd leave on their doorstep in the morning. The morning came gray and still. A thin sheet of frost covered the porch, and the air smelled like pine and quiet. I stood there with the small box in my hands, wrapped in plain brown paper, tied with a ribbon that matched the one on the piggy bank they had given me. The house across town wasn't far. The streets were empty, the snow piled high along the sidewalks. Christmas decorations still blinked weakly through the fog. Plastic Santas, glowing reindeer, the last remnants of someone else's cheer. When I reached their street, I parked 2 houses away. Their BMW sat gleaming in the driveway, still sparkling under the weak sunlight. It looked cold, out of place, like something too perfect for the world it sat in. I stepped out of the car, boots crunching softly against the frozen ground. My breath rose in little clouds. I walked slowly, the box tucked close to my chest. It wasn't heavy, but it carried the weight of everything I'd swallowed last night. The silence, the humiliation, the ache that had no name. At their doorstep, I paused. The wreath on the door shimmered with gold ribbons and artificial berries. I placed the box gently beneath it, right where they would see it first thing in the morning. No note this time, no grand gesture, just the truth inside that box, waiting for daylight to find it. Then I turned and walked away. By the time I returned home, the sun had risen higher, painting long shadows across my living room floor. I made coffee and sat at the table, hands wrapped around the mug, staring at the steam as it curled upward and disappeared. Somewhere out there, they would open it soon. Maybe Riley would be the first. She always liked to be in control of things. Maybe she'd think it was another cheap gift. And then she'd see what was inside. I didn't smile this time. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt still, like I'd finally put something down that had been too heavy to carry any longer. Around noon, the phone rang. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times before picking up. "Mom?" Ethan's voice sounded sharp, confused, almost panicked. "Yes?" I said softly, taking a sip of coffee. What did you do?" I could hear voices in the background, Riley's shrill tone, someone else gasping, maybe her mother crying. "I just left you a Christmas gift," I said. There was a pause then. "You sold the house?" The way he said it, half disbelief, half realization, made my chest ache. "I transferred it last week," I replied. "The papers were signed before Christmas Eve." "Why? Why would you do that?" I could picture him pacing, running his hands through his hair, the way he always did when something didn't go his way. "Because, Ethan," I said quietly, "that house wasn't a gift anymore. It became a trophy. And I didn't raise you to worship things." He didn't answer. I could hear Riley yelling in the background now, her voice breaking through the line like static. She said you ruined us." Ethan finally shouted. I took a deep breath. No, I just reminded you where everything came from. Silence. Long, heavy silence. Then the line went dead. The afternoon passed slowly. I spent it cleaning, folding laundry, feeding Whiskers. The cat meowed softly, curling around my ankles as if he sensed something was different. Maybe he felt the same peace I did. By evening, the world outside had turned gold again. The snow glittered, untouched. I walked out to the porch and sat on the old rocking chair, pulling a blanket over my lap. The wind carried the faint sound of church bells in the distance. Somewhere children were still playing in the snow, their laughter rising and fading like a melody. I closed my eyes. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like someone's burden. I felt like myself again. Later that night, I heard the sound of tires on gravel. Headlights flashed briefly through the window. My heart tightened, but I didn't move. A knock followed. Firm, hesitant. I opened the door to find Ethan standing there, coat half zipped, hair disheveled. His breath came out in white puffs. "Mom," he said. His voice was low, almost childlike. Behind him, the BMW sat parked on the street, its polished surface reflecting the porch light. "Riley's gone to her mother's," he said after a pause. She said she can't be with someone who lets his mother humiliate her." I didn't answer right away. I just stepped aside and nodded toward the living room. "Come in before you freeze." He did. Slowly, like a man stepping into a place he wasn't sure he belonged in anymore. We sat by the fire. The silence between us was thick, but not angry, just full of all the words we hadn't said for years. Finally he spoke. "I didn't know the house was still in your name." "I know," I said. "That was the point." He rubbed his face with both hands. "You didn't have to sell it. You could have just told me." I looked into the fire. "Would you have listened?" He didn't answer. His hands fell to his knees, his shoulders slumped. "I didn't mean for things to get this far," he said. "I thought giving her that car would make everyone happy." "Ethan," I said gently, "you don't buy happiness. You build it." The flames cracked softly. He nodded, his eyes glistening in the light. After a moment, I stood and walked to the small table by the window. I picked up the old photo frame I'd left there, the one of him and his father, both of them smiling with dirt on their faces after building the porch swing years ago. I handed it to him. "That's the man who gave you everything you have, including the chance to lose it." He looked down at the photo, and for the first time his face broke. Not in anger, just grief. The kind that comes when truth hits too hard to fight. "I'm sorry," he whispered. I sat back down beside him, laying a hand on his arm. "You're not the first to forget where home really is. Just don't make it a habit." He nodded, wiping his eyes quickly. We talked a while longer, about the house, about his father, about how Riley had changed him, how he had changed himself. When he finally stood to leave, the night had deepened, and the fire had burned down to embers. "Where will you go?" I asked. "Not sure yet," he said. "Maybe stay with a friend. Figure things out." I walked him to the door. Before he stepped outside, he turned to me. "What did you really put in that box, Mom?" I smiled faintly. "Just a lesson, wrapped nicely." He nodded, the corner of his mouth twitching as if he understood more than he wanted to. "Good night, Ethan." "Good night, Mom." He left, the crunch of snow fading into the distance. When the door closed, I exhaled long and slow. The air felt lighter somehow, like the house had finally let go of something it had been holding. I walked back to the window, watching the snow drift across the empty street. Somewhere in the dark, the BMW's taillights vanished around the corner. I whispered softly to the quiet room, "Merry Christmas, Daniel." I think he finally saw the light. The clock ticked gently. The fire glowed low. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt like the night itself was listening. The days that followed were quiet. Too quiet, the kind that sits heavy in a house and makes the walls seem to breathe. The snow kept falling, soft and steady, covering everything like it was trying to hide the mess people left behind. I woke early each morning, made coffee, fed Whiskers, and watched the sea of white outside my window. My son didn't call. I didn't expect him to. Some truths need silence before they can make sense. It wasn't anger I felt, just a hollow stillness, the kind that comes when you finally stop waiting for people to change. That Sunday, I bundled up and went into town. The small grocery store was nearly empty, most folks still recovering from the holidays. I picked up flour, tea, and a small bundle of tulips someone had imported from out west. Yellow ones. Daniel used to say yellow flowers reminded him of beginnings. At the counter, the clerk, Mrs. Harper, smiled. "You survived Christmas, huh?" I smiled back. "Barely." She laughed softly, scanning my things. "Family drama?" I nodded. "The usual kind." When I stepped back outside, the cold air hit my face, sharp and clean. The parking lot was nearly empty except for one familiar car parked at the far end, a silver sedan I recognized right away. Ethan's. He was sitting inside, staring straight ahead. For a moment, I thought of pretending not to see him, but that's not what mothers do, even when their hearts are tired. So I walked over and tapped gently on the window. He startled, then rolled it down. His eyes looked tired, older somehow. "Hey, Mom." "Hey." I nodded toward the passenger side. "Mind if I sit?" He unlocked the door without a word. The heater hummed softly. The air smelled faintly of coffee and regret. "I was in the area," he said, though we both knew he wasn't. "Just needed to talk." I figured. He rubbed his hands together. "Riley moved out yesterday, took her things, said she'd file for divorce." I waited. "I know you didn't mean for this to happen," he said quietly, "but maybe it needed to." I looked at him carefully. "What do you mean?" He sighed, leaning back. "It's like I've been walking around half asleep these past few years. Everything was about appearances. The car, the job, the house, none of it felt real. Not like before. Before, when Dad was still around, when we didn't have much but you and he made it feel like we did." I smiled faintly. "That's because we had each other. Everything else was just decoration." He nodded, staring out the windshield. "I miss that." The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable this time. It was the kind of quiet that let the heart breathe. After a while, I said softly, "You know, your father left that house to you because he believed you'd build a home inside it, not just live there." Ethan's eyes glistened. I guess I forgot what that meant. I reached over, laid my hand over his. "You remember now. That's what matters." He came by more often after that. Sometimes he'd bring dinner, sometimes just coffee. We didn't talk about Riley much. We didn't have to. Some things fade better in silence. Instead, we talked about simple things, how work was going, how the sea looked different every day, how Whiskers had gotten lazier with age. One night, he brought over an old box. "I found this in the attic before I left," he said, setting it on the table. Inside were Christmas ornaments, handmade ones we'd crafted years ago. Popsicle sticks, buttons, glue that had dried and cracked over time. One of them was shaped like a heart, painted red, the color now faded to pink. On the back, written in a child's crooked handwriting, were the words, "For Mom and Dad." He picked it up, smiling. "I can't believe you kept these all these years." I chuckled softly. "Mothers keep everything, even the things that broke." He turned the ornament over in his hand. "I think I forgot who I used to be." "Then find him again," I said. "He's still there, just quieter." He looked at me, really looked, and I saw a flicker of the boy he used to be, the one who once built me a birdhouse out of scrap wood and painted it blue because he knew it was my favorite color. We hung the ornament on the small tree in my living room that night. It was late to still have it up, but I didn't care. It felt right. The following week, Ethan started volunteering at the community center. He said he wanted to do something that made him feel useful again. I'd see him in town sometimes, handing out food, helping kids with homework. People smiled when they saw him. That used to be his gift, making people feel lighter just by being around. One afternoon, as I was sweeping the porch, a car pulled up. Ethan stepped out, holding a small box wrapped in green paper. "What's this?" I asked, smiling. "An apology," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "Or a bribe?" He laughed. "Maybe both." Inside the box was a delicate glass ornament in the shape of a heart. On the back, etched in small letters, were the words, "Thank you for everything you gave me, and for what you took away." I traced the words with my fingertip, feeling my throat tighten. "You didn't have to do this." "I did," he said softly, "because now I get it." I nodded, tears welling but not falling. "Then Merry Christmas, Ethan." He smiled. "It's January, Mom." "I know," I said, chuckling, "but it's never too late for the right kind of gift." That night, after he left, I stood by the window again, just like that first night. The snow had melted, leaving patches of brown grass and muddy ground. The world was waking up again. I held the glass ornament in my hand, the firelight dancing through it. It caught the colors of the room, gold, red, soft amber, and reflected them like tiny sparks of memory. On the table still sat the piggy bank they had given me. I hadn't thrown it away. It wasn't about bitterness anymore. It was about remembering how far I'd come from that moment. I opened the piggy bank carefully, letting the 3 crumpled bills fall into my palm. I smoothed them out, folded them neatly, and placed them inside a new envelope labeled for Ethan's second chance. Then I tucked the envelope into my drawer. Some lessons don't need to be spoken. They just need to live quietly, ready for the day they're understood. Before bed, I walked out to the porch one last time. The sky was clear, full of stars. I could hear the faint sound of the ocean even from here, its rhythm steady and patient. I thought of Daniel, of the home we'd built with love instead of luxury. I thought of Ethan as a boy, his laughter echoing down these same steps. And I thought of the woman who had tried to humiliate me, who believed money could measure worth. I didn't wish her harm. I didn't wish her anything at all. I just whispered into the night, some gifts take time to open. The wind carried the words away, soft and sure. Inside, the fire flickered low, whiskers purred on the rug, the glass heart glowed faintly in the light. And for the first time in a long while, I felt something simple, pure, and true. Peace. Winter began to loosen its grip, but the cold still lingered in the mornings. The frost melted slower on my side of town, as if the earth here liked to hold on to things a little longer. I didn't mind. Some memories need time to thaw. Ethan came by every few days now, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He'd bring groceries, help fix the creaky porch steps, or sit quietly while I knitted. The silence between us had softened. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was the kind that made a house feel full again. One morning, as I poured him coffee, he said, "Mom, do you ever regret selling the house?" I looked out the window at the bare trees. No, it wasn't mine anymore. Not really. Once a home starts holding pain instead of love, it's time to let it go. He nodded slowly. "I think I understand that now." "I know you do," I said. "That's why I don't regret a thing." Later that week, I received a letter in the mail. The handwriting was unfamiliar, tight, slanted, elegant. I almost threw it out, thinking it was a bill or advertisement. But when I turned it over, I saw the name on the back, Riley. My hands stilled. For a moment, I just stared at it. Then, with a deep breath, I opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of thick paper. "Mrs. Edwards, I won't pretend I'm writing this out of remorse. I'm writing because I need you to know I lost everything. The car, the house, the marriage. I thought I could control it all, but you proved me wrong. I don't hate you anymore. I just hope someday you'll think of me with something other than disappointment. Riley." I folded the letter back up and set it on the table beside my teacup. I didn't feel anger, not even pity, just a quiet sense of understanding. Sometimes the people who hurt you the most are the ones who never learned how to love themselves. I whispered softly, "You'll figure it out, Riley, in your own time." Then I tucked the letter into the drawer beside Daniel's old watch, another memory I didn't need to revisit often, but couldn't quite throw away. The next morning, the world felt lighter. The snow was melting fast now, turning into soft streams that ran down the street and shimmered under the sun. I decided to take a walk down by the pier. The air was crisp, carrying the smell of salt and cedar. I'd walked that same path countless times over the years, but today felt different. The world seemed awake again. I passed the bakery, the one Daniel used to love. The owner, Mrs. Keller, waved through the window, holding up a tray of fresh rolls. I smiled and stepped inside. "You look well, Alice," she said warmly. "Haven't seen you since before the holidays." "I've been learning new lessons," I said, laughing softly. She nodded knowingly. "Ah, life's little teachers. They always find us, don't they?" I bought a loaf of bread and 2 cinnamon rolls, then walked back toward home. When I turned onto my street, I saw Ethan standing by his car, shoveling what was left of the snow from my driveway. "You don't have to do that," I called out. He looked up, smiling. "I know, but it feels good to fix things." There it was again. The boy I remembered, hidden beneath the man life had worn down. The one who used to patch up old birdhouses and bring me wildflowers he'd picked from the yard. "Come inside," I said. "I got us cinnamon rolls." Inside, the house smelled like sugar and coffee. We sat by the fire while the snow melted off his boots. "I saw Riley's letter," I said eventually. He stopped mid-bite. She wrote to you? Yes. She said she's lost everything. He looked down, his jaw tightening. She's good at blaming the world. She's also good at teaching lessons without meaning to, I said. You both are. He smiled faintly. You always find the good in people. No, I said gently. I just try to find the reason behind their broken parts. He stared into the fire for a long moment. Do you ever wish things had gone differently? I sipped my tea before answering. No, because if they had, we wouldn't be sitting here right now, drinking coffee, sharing cinnamon rolls. I'd still be pretending everything was fine, and you'd still be asleep inside a life that wasn't yours. He nodded slowly. I guess sometimes losing everything is the only way to wake up. Exactly. Over the next few weeks, he started talking about moving to a smaller place, something of his own. I don't need a big house, he said one afternoon. I just want something real. I offered to help him look, but he shook his head. You've done enough, Mom. This time, I want to build something with my own hands. And he did. He found a small cottage on the edge of town, nothing fancy. 2 bedrooms, a tiny garden, and a porch that creaked with every step. He painted the door blue, the same color as the birdhouse he'd made me as a boy. When I saw it for the first time, I felt something stir in my chest, a warmth that had been missing for too long. He laughed when he saw my expression. What do you think? I smiled. I think your father would have been proud. He looked away, blinking fast. I hope so. We spent the afternoon cleaning, unpacking boxes and hanging curtains. It wasn't much, but it was home. His home. That evening, as I drove back to my own house, the sun was setting behind the hills, turning the sky a deep shade of gold. The snow was nearly gone now, replaced by patches of muddy earth and the first hints of green. When I walked inside, the house greeted me with the faint crackle of the fire and the soft meow of Whiskers. I fed him, then sat by the window, watching the last light fade. On the table beside me sat the glass heart Ethan had given me, the one etched with his apology. It caught the firelight, glowing softly. I reached over, holding it up to the light, and whispered, We're going to be okay, Daniel. He's finding his way back. The ocean roared faintly in the distance, steady and endless. That night, I dreamed of our old house, the one I'd sold. In the dream, it wasn't empty. The walls glowed warm, the rooms filled with laughter again. But when I looked closer, it wasn't Riley or Ethan inside. It was me and Daniel, years ago, sitting by the fire, holding cups of coffee, talking about nothing and everything. He smiled at me. You did what you had to, Alice. When I woke, the sun was breaking through the curtains. I lay there for a while, listening to the sound of the world waking up. Then I got up, made breakfast, and went about my day. Because that's what you do after the storm passes. You start living again, one quiet morning at a time. In the afternoon, Ethan called. Hey, Mom, he said. I was thinking, would you like to come over next weekend? I'm having a few friends from the community center for dinner. I'd love to, I said. What can I bring? Just yourself, he replied. After we hung up, I sat for a long time, smiling. For the first time in years, Christmas didn't feel like the end of something. It felt like the start of something new. The kind of peace that doesn't shout, doesn't glitter, just hums quietly in the background of your life. And as the sun dipped low behind the trees, painting everything in soft light, I whispered to no one in particular, maybe some gifts are meant to take time. The fire crackled, the house breathed, and in that silence, I felt Daniel's presence, steady and sure, reminding me that love, once planted right, never really dies. It just changes form until it finds its way home again. Spring came slowly that year, creeping into town with soft rain and the scent of wet earth. The snow melted completely, leaving behind small patches of green that pushed through the soil like quiet promises. I started opening my windows again, letting the wind carry the smell of cedar and salt through the house. It was the first time in months that it felt alive inside these walls. Ethan kept his word. Every weekend he called. Sometimes he invited me for dinner. Sometimes he just came by to sit on the porch. We didn't need big conversations anymore. The silence between us had turned gentle, the way silence sounds when it's filled with understanding instead of distance. One Saturday morning, I drove to his new cottage. The blue door gleamed under the sunlight, and the small garden out front was already blooming with wildflowers. He was kneeling by the porch, hammer in hand, fixing a loose plank. Still at it? I asked, stepping out of the car. He looked up, grinning. You taught me well. Never let a creak go unanswered. I laughed softly. Your father used to say that. Yeah, he said, standing. I think I finally understand what he meant. Inside, the cottage smelled like wood and coffee. He'd painted the walls cream and hung some of our old family photos on the staircase. In one corner sat a record player, the same one Daniel and I used to play during Christmas mornings. Found it in the attic, Ethan said, noticing where my eyes went. It still works. He placed a record on the turntable and lowered the needle. The familiar scratch filled the air before the soft melody of an old Sinatra song began. For a moment, time folded in on itself. I was back in our living room, Daniel twirling me around, Ethan giggling from the couch. The memory hit so suddenly that my eyes burned. Ethan caught it, smiled softly, and offered his hand. Dance with me, Mom. I hesitated, then took it. We swayed slowly across the small living room, the music wrapping around us like a memory brought to life. I miss him too, Ethan whispered. I know, I said, but I think he's here more than we realize. When the song ended, we both laughed, awkward and teary, and sat down again. Over the next few months, Ethan grew into someone new. He started volunteering full-time, teaching carpentry to kids who didn't have much. He found joy in small things. The sound of rain on the roof, the way sunlight hit the windows just right. It was the kind of peace money couldn't buy. One evening, he stopped by my house with a folder under his arm. I've been thinking, he said. I want to do something with the land where the old house stood. You know, before it sold to that developer. I raised an eyebrow. What kind of something? He opened the folder, revealing sketches and notes. A small community workshop for teens. A place they can learn to build things, fix bikes, make furniture. Something Dad would have loved. I looked at him and my heart swelled. You really are your father's son, he smiled. I hope so. We spent the evening going through his plans, talking about the foundation, the cost, the time it would take. It reminded me of when Daniel and I used to sit up late, dreaming of the future, believing anything was possible as long as we built it together. When he left that night, I stood at the window watching his car disappear down the road. The stars were faint behind a thin veil of cloud, but they were there, steady, patient, like memories that refused to fade. A week later, I found myself standing in front of the old lot. The house was gone now, replaced by open land and a few stubborn trees. The air smelled different here. Cleaner, maybe. I walked across the dirt slowly, my boots leaving small impressions in the soil. I could still picture where everything had been. The porch, the window boxes, the swing Daniel built by hand. I knelt and pressed my palm against the ground. It felt cool, alive. Thank you, I whispered. I wasn't sure who I was thanking. Daniel, fate, or maybe the version of myself who finally let go. Behind me, Ethan's car pulled up. He got out, waving a hand. I thought I'd find you here. I was just remembering. He came to stand beside me. You think he'd be proud? I smiled. I think he already is. We stood there for a long while, the wind brushing against our faces. Then Ethan said, Mom, when the workshop's done, I want you to come to the opening. You'll be the first to see it. I wouldn't miss it. Time moved quietly after that. The project began. I'd stop by sometimes to see the progress. Walls rising, beams going up, kids laughing as they painted the signs. The sound of hammers and saws filled the air, rhythmic and hopeful. Ethan worked harder than I'd ever seen him work. There was purpose in his steps now, not pride or guilt, just purpose. And that's a rare kind of peace for a man to find. On the first day of summer, he came by again, covered in dust and paint. It's almost done, he said, grinning. We're planning the opening next week. That's wonderful, I said. Your father would have loved this. He nodded. You'll come, right? Of course. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, looking out at the moonlight spreading across the yard. The world was so quiet, so still. On the table beside me sat Daniel's old photo, the corners worn, the frame slightly chipped. I wish you could see him now, I whispered. But maybe he could. The next morning, I baked 3 dozen cookies, Ethan's favorite recipe from when he was a boy. Oatmeal raisin, just the way he liked them. I wrapped them neatly in parchment and tied them with string. When the day of the opening arrived, the sky was clear and bright. Families gathered around, kids running across the grass. A wooden sign hung above the door. Edward's workshop, built for those who dream. Ethan stood in front of the crowd, nervous but smiling. He spoke about second chances, about what it meant to build something lasting. When he mentioned his father, his voice wavered. When he mentioned me, the crowd clapped softly. I stood in the back, watching him, my eyes blurring with tears I didn't try to hide. When the ribbon was cut, he turned toward me and beckoned. "Come on, Mom. You helped build this too." I walked forward, my heart heavy and light at the same time. Inside, the space smelled of fresh wood and paint. On one wall hung a small framed note, something Ethan must have found among Daniel's old papers. It read, "Build things that outlast your own hands. That's how you stay alive." I reached out and touched the glass. My voice caught in my throat. "You did it, Daniel," I whispered. "You really did." Ethan came to stand beside me. "No, Mom," he said softly. "You both did." That evening, as the sun dipped low behind the horizon, I sat on the porch of my little house with a cup of tea. Whiskers purred beside me, the world humming in its soft rhythm. The air smelled like summer now, warm earth, cut grass, and possibility. For years, I'd thought the best part of my life was behind me. But watching my son rebuild himself from the inside out, I realized something new. The best parts don't end. They just change shape. The sky turned pink, then gold. I closed my eyes and let the moment settle over me like a prayer. And when the wind brushed past, gentle and cool, I could almost hear Daniel's voice again, whispering through the quiet. "You see, Alice, you never really disappeared. You just had to remind them where you came from." I smiled to myself, the tea warm in my hands. Some gifts don't come wrapped in paper or ribbons. Some come years later, when you finally understand why things had to fall apart before they could fit together again. The light faded, the first stars appeared, and in that stillness, I felt it again, the peace that stays long after the noise is gone. The summer heat softened into early fall, the kind of season where the mornings were cool and the air smelled faintly of wood smoke. Leaves began to turn along the ridge, flashes of gold and amber painting the quiet streets. I always loved that time of year when the world seemed to exhale after months of holding its breath. Ethan's workshop had become the heart of the town. Every time I walked by, I could hear the buzz of saws, laughter, and the rhythm of hammers striking wood. The sound used to remind me of Daniel, and now it reminded me of Ethan, steady, patient, learning how to build a life worth keeping. Some mornings, I'd bring fresh bread or coffee for the kids who came to learn. They'd call me Miss Alice and ask for advice about sanding or painting. I wasn't much help with the tools, but I was good at listening. Sometimes that was enough. One of the kids, a boy named Noah, made me a small birdhouse. He was maybe 10, quiet, with eyes too old for his age. "You should have this," he said shyly, "so the birds can come visit." I smiled, tracing the rough edges. "Thank you, sweetheart. It's perfect." When I hung it outside my window that evening, the light hit it just right, turning the paint into a warm glow. It felt like a little echo of everything we'd built, something small but full of meaning. One afternoon, as I was trimming the lavender bushes in my yard, Ethan pulled up in his truck. He climbed out, carrying a cardboard box and a grin that told me he was up to something. "What's that?" I asked, wiping my hands on my apron. He set the box down carefully on the porch. "Something you forgot you owned." I raised an eyebrow. "That could be half my attic." He laughed, lifting out an old wooden frame wrapped in newspaper. "I found it while clearing a shelf in the workshop." When he peeled back the paper, I recognized it instantly. The family portrait Daniel had commissioned years ago. The three of us sitting by the garden, Daniel's arm around my shoulders, Ethan's head leaning against my side. I hadn't seen it since we moved from the old house. My throat tightened. "I thought it was lost." "I think it just needed to be found at the right time," he said. We hung it above the fireplace, the afternoon light catching Daniel's smile. The house suddenly felt fuller, like something had come home again. Ethan stayed for dinner. We cooked together, stew and cornbread, simple food but comforting. As we ate, he talked about expanding the workshop, adding a classroom for design and woodworking basics. "You sound like your father," I said, laughing softly. He smiled. Guess I finally figured out whose footsteps were worth following. The pride in his voice wasn't boastful. It was grounded, like roots finally finding soil. That night, after he left, I sat by the fire, the framed portrait glowing in the flickering light. For years, I thought my family was gone, that love had burned out like a dying flame. But here it was, different, quieter, but alive all the same. The next morning, a letter arrived. This one wasn't from Riley or from anyone I expected. The handwriting was unfamiliar, shaky, and uneven. It began simply, "Dear Mrs. Edwards, you don't know me, but I used to live in the house you sold last year. I wanted to tell you something." As I read, my eyes filled with tears. The new owner wrote about how they'd found the note I'd left behind inside the kitchen drawer. Daniel's letter, the one that said, "I gave you a home once. Now I'm giving it back to the world." They wrote that it inspired them to start over, to fix what was broken in their own family. "I don't know who you are," the letter ended, "but your words saved us. Thank you." I sat there for a long while, the paper trembling in my hands. The world had a funny way of sending echoes back to you when you least expected it. I folded the letter carefully and placed it beside the photo on the mantel. Then I whispered, "I guess your words traveled farther than we thought, Daniel." As autumn deepened, Ethan and I spent more time together. We built small rituals again, Sunday dinners, long walks near the pier, quiet evenings filled with stories about things we'd almost forgotten. One Sunday, as we walked along the edge of town, he said, "I've been thinking about Christmas this year." I smiled knowingly. "Already?" "Yeah, I want to do something different. No gifts, no parties, just a dinner. Me, you, a few of the kids from the workshop who don't have family nearby. We'll cook together, share stories." My eyes softened. "That sounds perfect." He looked ahead, hands in his pockets. "It's funny, Mom. Last Christmas I thought I'd lost everything. Now it feels like I finally have what matters." I touched his arm gently. "Sometimes losing what you wanted is how you find what you needed." He nodded, quiet for a moment. Then, almost hesitantly, he asked, "Do you think Dad would have forgiven me?" I stopped walking and turned to face him. "Ethan, your father never carried grudges. He only carried love. That's what you came from. So yes, he forgave you long before you needed it." He smiled, eyes bright with emotion. "I hope so." December came softly that year. The air was cold, but the world felt kind. Ethan's workshop glowed with strings of lights, the windows fogged from laughter and warmth. I helped him decorate, humming carols under my breath while the kids painted ornaments. Someone played the piano in the corner, and for a moment, I felt like I was inside a memory I'd wished for but never thought I'd see again. That evening, as we sat down to eat, one of the children, Noah, raised a toast. "To Miss Alice," he said shyly, holding up his cup of cider, "for teaching us what real gifts are." The room fell silent, then filled with gentle applause. My cheeks flushed. "Oh, I didn't teach you anything," I said, smiling. "You all reminded me." Ethan grinned across the table. "See? I told you they love you more than me." Everyone laughed, and in that laughter, I heard the sound of home. When I drove home that night, the stars were bright, the sky clear. I parked the car and stood for a moment in the stillness. The lights from the workshop twinkled faintly in the distance. Inside, the house was quiet, except for the soft ticking of the clock. I lit a candle and placed it by the window, the same window where a year ago I had stood alone, watching my world fall apart. Now that same window reflected something entirely different. Peace. I sat down, opened my journal, and wrote one line. Some gifts take a year to open. Some take a lifetime to understand. Then I closed it, smiling to myself. Before going to bed, I stepped out onto the porch. The wind was cold, but the kind of cold that wakes you up, not wears you down. Somewhere far off, I heard the faint hum of an engine, the sound of Ethan's truck heading home. I looked up at the night sky and whispered, "Merry Christmas, Daniel." He found his way. A shooting star streaked across the dark, gone in an instant, but bright enough to leave its mark. I stayed there for a while, breathing it all in, the quiet, the cold, the peace I'd built out of pieces of my past. And when I finally went inside, the candle still burned steady in the window, casting a soft golden light across the room. It flickered once, then steadied again, as if the house itself had decided to keep watch over everything we'd finally made right. Winter returned again, quiet and familiar, but this time it didn't bring the same kind of loneliness it once did. The snow fell softly across the fields, covering the town in silver light. From my porch, I could see the glow of Ethan's workshop in the distance, the warm hum of life still moving even in the cold. A year had passed since that last Christmas. Sometimes it amazed me how quickly time could change everything. The world outside was the same, but inside us, whole landscapes had shifted. That morning, I poured myself a cup of coffee and stood by the window. The birdhouse little Noah had made still hung there, dusted with snow, and a small sparrow hopped on its perch, shaking its feathers. Life always found its way back, even through the cold. The phone rang. "Morning, Mom," Ethan said. His voice always sounded brighter these days, steadier. "I was wondering if you're up for some company tonight?" I smiled, though he couldn't see it. "You don't even have to ask." "Good," he said. "I've got something to show you." When he arrived that evening, the air was crisp and the sky already dark. He stepped inside, brushing snow off his coat, carrying a folder tucked under his arm. "What's that?" I asked. He grinned. "Plans. Again." He set the folder on the table, opening it to reveal a drawing, another workshop layout, larger this time. "This one's not for me," he said. "One of the teens, Noah, wants to start a space for younger kids. He's been saving up his allowance and asked me to help him design it. I told him we'd need a grown-up to sponsor it. He said, 'Ask Miss Alice.'" I laughed softly. "That boy's got nerve." Ethan chuckled. "He's got heart, like someone else I know." I looked at the plans again. Simple, hopeful lines drawn by a young hand. "We'll help him," I said. Ethan smiled. "I knew you'd say that." We ate dinner together after that. Stew and cornbread again, our small ritual. The fire crackled, and outside the snow thickened, falling in slow, lazy spirals. When Ethan left, he paused by the door. "I'm proud of you, Mom," he said quietly. "You've built more than a home. You've built something that changes people." I touched his cheek gently. "No, honey. I just reminded them how to build themselves." A few days later, I visited the workshop. It was filled with kids as usual, hammers ringing, laughter spilling out into the street. On one wall hung a new sign, "Every hand can build something good." Noah ran up to me, waving his sketchbook. "Look, Miss Alice, we're calling it the Little Builders Club." I smiled, flipping through his pages. "That's a wonderful name, sweetheart." He grinned. "Mr. Ethan says you'll help us decorate when it's ready." "I wouldn't miss it," I said. For a moment, I watched them work. Small hands sanding, painting, shaping the wood. They didn't know it, but they were shaping something much bigger than the project in front of them. They were shaping their future. When I left, the sky was bright with sunlight reflecting off the snow. I drove home in silence, but inside me, something warm was growing, something I hadn't felt in years. That weekend, Ethan came by with a surprise. He handed me a small wrapped package. "What's this?" I asked. "Just open it." Inside was a small photo album. On the cover, in gold letters, it said, "A year of second chances." I flipped through the pages, pictures from the workshop, from family dinners, from quiet moments I didn't even realize he'd captured. Me laughing with the kids, Ethan painting the sign, whiskers curled on the porch in the sun. Halfway through, I stopped at a photo that made my breath catch. It was the old house, the one I'd sold. Someone had hung new curtains, planted flowers along the front steps, and right by the door, I could see the faint outline of a note taped to the glass. I looked up at Ethan. "Where did you get this?" "I drove by last week," he said. "The new owners said the place feels alive again. They wanted you to know they're grateful." My eyes filled with tears. "It's strange, isn't it? How something broken can bloom again in the right hands." He nodded. "You taught me that." As winter deepened, the days grew shorter, but I didn't mind the early darkness anymore. I had my small routines, the morning coffee, my evening walks, the quiet moments by the fire. One evening, I found myself digging through the old chest where I kept letters. Near the bottom was that first note from Riley, the one filled with pride and regret. I read it again, slowly, then set it beside Daniel's watch. The next day, I wrote a short reply. "Riley, I don't hold anything against you. Sometimes we need to lose our way before we can see clearly again. I wish you peace. Alice." I didn't know where to send it. Maybe I never would. But writing it felt like opening a window that had been stuck for too long. When I finished, I stepped outside. Snow was falling again, soft and thick, blanketing everything in silence. The world looked clean, forgiven. Christmas came around once more. Ethan kept his promise, a small dinner, no gifts. The workshop kids came too, their laughter filling my living room. We cooked together, told stories, burned the first batch of cookies, and laughed until our sides hurt. As we sat down to eat, Ethan raised his glass. "To my mom," he said, "who taught me that the best kind of gift isn't something you hold, it's something that holds you when you need it most." The room fell quiet for a heartbeat, then everyone clapped. I smiled, my heart swelling. "To second chances," I said softly. "To second chances." They echoed. That night, after everyone had gone, I stood by the window again. The candle flickered, casting shadows that danced across the room. I thought of the woman I'd been a year ago, the one who stood outside her son's house, humiliated, holding a piggy bank and 3 crumpled bills. I thought of the silence that followed, the ache, the slow rebuilding of a life. And now, here I was, surrounded by warmth, by laughter, by peace. I whispered into the quiet, "You see, Riley, you were right about one thing. The best gift was me disappearing, because sometimes you have to disappear to truly be found." Outside, the wind brushed against the windows, gentle and steady. I turned off the lights, leaving only the candle burning, its glow reflected in the glass, warm and soft. For the first time, the reflection didn't look lonely. It looked whole. Then I blew out the flame, whispering, "Merry Christmas, Daniel. Merry Christmas, my boy." The house settled around me, peaceful and still. The snow kept falling outside, each flake landing softly, as if the world itself was tucking us in for another quiet, gentle year. The new year came quietly. No fireworks, no big celebration, just the soft whisper of snow falling outside and the crackle of the fire inside. I had learned to love the quiet. It carried a kind of peace that noise never could. Ethan called on New Year's morning. "Happy New Year, Mom," he said cheerfully. I could hear the sound of laughter in the background, probably the kids from the workshop. "We're having brunch down here if you want to join." "I might just take you up on that," I said, smiling. By the time I arrived, the workshop smelled like pancakes and coffee. Tables had been pushed together, covered with mismatched plates and handmade decorations. The kids ran around with paper crowns on their heads, giggling. Ethan waved from across the room. "Mom, over here." He'd set up a small table near the window for the 2 of us. "Didn't think you'd actually come," he teased. "I didn't think you'd be awake before noon." I shot back, laughing. He grinned. Fair point. As we ate, I looked around at the faces in the room. Some I knew, some I didn't, but every one of them looked content, connected, whole. It reminded me of the kind of Christmas mornings Daniel and I used to dream about, full of noise and kindness, where everyone belonged. Ethan leaned back in his chair. "I was thinking," he said, "about expanding the club again. Maybe set up an art room for the kids who don't like woodworking." "That's a wonderful idea," I said. "You're turning this place into more than a workshop." He smiled. "It's starting to feel like home for a lot of people. I guess that's what Dad would have wanted." I nodded, looking out the window at the snow-covered trees. "Yes," I whispered, "it's exactly what he would have wanted." A few weeks later, the snow began to melt again, revealing the first signs of spring. I spent my mornings tending to the garden behind my house, turning the soil, trimming the lavender that had survived the frost, planting seeds I hoped would bloom by summer. Ethan visited often, sometimes bringing the kids along to help. Noah came one afternoon with a small potted plant wrapped in twine. "It's from me and the others," he said proudly. "A peace lily. It's supposed to bring calm to your home." I knelt to his level, smiling. "Then it'll fit right in here." As he helped me dig a small hole in the garden, I realized how full my world had become again. A year ago, everything felt like loss. Now it felt like restoration. Quiet, slow, but steady. In March, Ethan told me something that made my heart pause. "Mom," he said one evening as we sat on the porch, "I've been thinking about reaching out to Riley." The teacup nearly slipped from my hand. "Oh?" "Not to go back," he added quickly, "just to close that chapter properly." I studied his face. He wasn't nervous, just thoughtful. "Do you think she'll want to talk?" He shrugged. "I don't know, but I don't want the past hanging over me anymore. I think she deserves to know I don't hold anything against her." I nodded slowly. "Closure is its own kind of peace." He smiled. "You taught me that." Weeks passed before I heard anything more about it. Then one afternoon, he stopped by, looking lighter somehow. "She wrote back," he said simply. "And He pulled a folded letter from his pocket and handed it to me. Riley's handwriting was familiar, neat, careful, just like before. Ethan, thank you for writing. I've had time to think. I know I hurt you, and I hurt your mother. I let pride guide me, and I've paid for it in ways you'll never know. I'm not asking for forgiveness, but I want you to know I'm trying to be better. Please tell your mother. I'm sorry. When I finished reading, I let out a long breath. Well, I said softly, it looks like she's finally learning what really matters. Ethan nodded. I think she's finding her own peace, too. Spring came fully then. The snow vanished, the air turned warm, and the town seemed to breathe again. The workshop's garden bloomed with wildflowers, and laughter once more filled its open doors. One afternoon, Ethan held a small event there, a gratitude day, he called it. The kids displayed things they'd made. Shelves, picture frames, tiny birdhouses painted in every color imaginable. I helped serve lemonade while Ethan gave a small speech about second chances and kindness. He finished by saying, sometimes we build with wood and nails. Sometimes we build with forgiveness. The room went quiet for a moment, and then everyone clapped. I felt Daniel there with us, in every hammer strike, every shared smile. That night, after the event, I came home and sat by the window again. The birdhouse outside was full now, tiny birds fluttering in and out, feeding their young. The peace lily Noah had planted had begun to bloom, its white petals opening toward the light. I thought about everything that had happened over the past year, the humiliation, the silence, the slow rebuilding of love. If someone had told me back then that it would lead to this kind of peace, I wouldn't have believed them. I picked up my journal and wrote, forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It just frees your hands so you can build the future. Then I closed it and turned off the lamp. A few days later, I received a small envelope in the mail. No return address, just my name written in simple cursive. Inside was a photo. It was of Riley. She was standing outside a small daycare, smiling, surrounded by children. On the back, she'd written, starting over. Thank you for teaching me how. I sat there for a long time holding the photo. There were no tears this time, just quiet amazement at how far we'd all come. When Ethan came by that evening, I showed it to him. He smiled softly. I guess even broken people can build again. Yes, I said. They just need to find the right foundation. He laughed lightly. You always have the perfect words. Maybe, I said. Or maybe the words were waiting for me to live them first. That night, I walked out to the garden. The moon was bright, and the air smelled of lilacs and earth. The birdhouse swayed gently in the breeze, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear the faint sound of the ocean. I whispered thank you, though I wasn't sure to whom. Maybe to Daniel. Maybe to life itself. As I turned to go back inside, a gust of wind passed through the yard, scattering the petals of the peace lily across the grass. They shimmered in the moonlight, soft as whispers, quiet as forgiveness. I smiled. Everything had come full circle. The giving, the losing, the rebuilding, the grace. And as I stepped back into my home, the warmth followed me, as if the house itself was breathing again, alive with every moment that had brought us here. Summer came early that year. The days stretched long, golden, and full of warmth. My garden was alive again, lavender blooming thick along the fence, bees moving lazily between the flowers, the hum of life constant in the air. I found peace in small things now, watering the plants at dawn, baking bread, watching the shadows move across the floor as the day passed. Ethan's workshop had grown beyond what either of us imagined. He'd built an addition, a space for art, just as he'd promised. The walls were covered in paintings and photographs made by the kids. One corner held a shelf of letters, thank you notes, sketches, and cards that said, "You helped me build this." Sometimes I'd visit in the afternoons, just to sit in the back with a cup of tea and listen to the sound of it all. Hammers, laughter, the chatter of young voices full of hope. Every time I did, I could almost hear Daniel's laugh mixed in, soft and approving. One afternoon, Ethan came to sit beside me. You know, Mom, he said, we've been thinking of starting a scholarship fund. For kids who want to keep learning after this place, maybe call it the Edwards Foundation. I turned to him, eyes shining. Your father would have loved that. He nodded. It's his legacy, and yours. I reached over and took his hand. No, Ethan, it's yours now. You built this with your own 2 hands, and that's what makes it beautiful. A few days later, we received an invitation in the mail, one addressed to both of us. The handwriting was careful, familiar, Riley's. Ethan opened it at my kitchen table. Inside was a simple note. I'm getting married next month. It's small, quiet. I understand if you don't come, but I wanted you to know I'm happy now. Thank you for the lessons I didn't appreciate when I should have, Riley. Ethan read it twice, then set it down. She found her peace, I said softly. He sighed. Yeah, I guess she did. There was no bitterness in his voice, just a quiet acceptance. I think I'll send her something, he said after a moment. Not a gift, just a letter, to wish her well. I nodded. That would be a good thing to do. Sometimes peace wasn't about mending what was broken. It was about letting it rest where it fell. As summer deepened, I began hosting dinners on my porch again. The kids from the workshop would stop by, sometimes with their parents, bringing pies and stories. Ethan always came early to help me set the table, though he never followed my instructions. Forks go on the left, I reminded him one evening. He grinned. It's artistic asymmetry, Mom. You should try it sometime. I laughed, shaking my head. You're impossible. Maybe, he said, but you still love me. Always, I replied. That night, the sunset poured over the porch in soft orange light. We ate, we talked, and for a while, it felt like the whole world fit perfectly within the glow of that small wooden table. One day, Ethan brought me a gift, a framed newspaper clipping. The headline read, Local Workshop Builds Hope for a New Generation. There was a photo of him standing with the kids, smiling, sawdust in his hair. I traced the picture with my finger. You've become the man your father dreamed you'd be. He smiled shyly. I had a good teacher. No, I said softly. You had life. It just took time for you to listen to it. He laughed. You always have the last word, don't you? Someone has to keep you humble. August arrived heavy with heat. On one of those still bright mornings, I woke early to the sound of a soft knock on the door. When I opened it, Ethan stood there holding a bouquet of wildflowers. For you, he said. What's the occasion? He smiled. No occasion, just thank you. I took the flowers, breathing in their sweet scent. For what? For not giving up on me, for disappearing when I needed to see what was missing. I smiled faintly. You make it sound like I had a plan. Didn't you? He asked teasingly. I shook my head. No, I just did what mothers do. We love, even when it hurts. He looked at me for a long time, his eyes full of something unspoken. Then he reached out, hugged me tightly, and whispered, You're my home, Mom. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I just held on. Later that day, as I arranged the flowers in a vase, I thought about everything that had happened. The betrayals, the pain, the long, slow rebuilding. I realized that sometimes the people who break your heart are the very same ones who teach you how strong it is. The sound of the ocean drifted through the window. It had been months since I'd walked down to the shore, so I grabbed my shawl and decided to go. The beach was quiet, the tide low. The water shimmered under the afternoon sun. I walked until I reached the spot where Daniel and I used to sit, the one with the flat rocks and the view that stretched forever. I sat down, closing my eyes. You'd be proud of him, I whispered. Of both of us, I think. The waves answered in soft applause, rolling against the sand. That evening, I found an old wooden box tucked in the corner of my closet. Inside were keepsakes, the photo of our family, Daniel's watch, a letter from Riley, and the piggy bank. The same one with $3 still inside. I hadn't touched it in over a year. I turned it over in my hands, feeling its weight. It didn't sting anymore. It was just a memory, a symbol of everything that had changed. I opened the small slot and took out the 3 bills. They were worn now, creased from time. I smiled, folded them neatly, and slipped them into an envelope. On the front, I wrote, For the Edwards Foundation, to remind us where we started. The next day, I handed it to Ethan. He looked confused at first, then smiled. You kept it all this time? I did, I said. Not because it hurt, but because it reminded me how far we've come. He hugged me again, quiet and sure. By late August, the air had begun to cool. The days were shorter, the evenings soft and full of crickets. I'd sit on my porch at twilight, tea in hand, watching the sun dip behind the hills. Sometimes, when the wind rustled through the trees, I'd think I heard Daniel's voice again, steady, kind, familiar. And I'd whisper back, We did it, love. We finally found peace. Whiskers would curl up beside me, purring softly as if agreeing. That weekend, Ethan invited me to the workshop's anniversary celebration. The sign outside read, "1 year of building hope." The place was packed with families, laughter spilling out into the street. When it was time for speeches, Ethan stood on the small wooden stage and gestured for me to join him. "This woman," he said, smiling, "taught me everything I know about building. Not with wood, with patience, with love, with forgiveness." The crowd clapped, and I felt heat rise to my cheeks. He continued, "A year ago, I thought I'd lost everything, but because of her, I learned that sometimes the hardest endings lead to the best beginnings." He turned to me. "This workshop, this entire journey, it started because you believed in me when I didn't deserve it. So tonight, I want to dedicate this place to you." He pulled the cover off a plaque mounted on the wall. It read, "The Alice Edwards Center for Hope, built from love, forged in forgiveness." The room went quiet. My eyes blurred. I reached up and touched the plaque, my hand trembling. "I don't know what to say," I whispered. Ethan smiled softly. "Just say you're proud." "I am," I said, my voice breaking. "More than you'll ever know." The crowd erupted in applause. Someone started the music, and laughter filled the air again. As I stood there, surrounded by light and warmth, I realized something simple but profound. The world gives back what you give to it. Sometimes slowly, sometimes in ways you never expect, but it always finds its way home. When I looked up, the reflection of the plaque shimmered in the glass, golden and steady, like the heart of everything we'd built together. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I'd lost anything at all. I'd simply come full circle. The air turned crisp again as September gave way to October. The scent of apples and fallen leaves drifted through the streets, and every porch in town began to wear a crown of pumpkins and wreaths. It was my favorite time of year. Qua honest, a season that reminded me how beautiful change could be when you stopped fearing it. Ethan's workshop was busier than ever. The Little Builders Club had doubled in size, and the new art room was filled with color and laughter. Whenever I stopped by, I'd find a mess of paintbrushes, glue sticks, and tiny hands creating something wonderful. I didn't even mind the noise. It was the sound of life rebuilding itself, one project at a time. One chilly morning, Ethan showed up at my door with a thermos of coffee and a familiar twinkle in his eye. "Morning, Mom. Got a minute?" "Depends," I said, eyeing the thermos suspiciously. "Is that bribe coffee?" "Guilty," he laughed. "Come on, there's something I want you to see." He drove us down the coastal road, the trees blazing in shades of gold and red. We pulled up to a small clearing overlooking the bay. There, nestled between two tall oaks, stood a new building, unfinished but full of promise. A wooden sign leaned against the fence, "The Edwards Home for Healing." I turned to him, stunned. "What is this?" Ethan smiled. "It's the next step, a place for women, mostly older, some widows, some just forgotten. Somewhere safe, where they can learn, rebuild, and live again." Tears blurred my vision. "Ethan, this is extraordinary." He shrugged, smiling shyly. "You inspired it. You showed me what strength looks like when the world stops seeing it." I touched his arm, my heart swelling. "You have no idea what this means to me." He looked at me, eyes soft. "I think I do." In the weeks that followed, we worked side by side to get the center ready. I spent hours painting, choosing furniture, helping with small details that made the place feel like home. It reminded me of the early days of my marriage. Daniel and I building our first house together, laughing through mistakes, dreaming out loud. Sometimes I'd catch myself humming one of our old songs while I worked. Ethan would glance over, smile, and say, "You still remember every word, don't you?" "I remember everything worth keeping," I'd reply. The community began to help too. People donated blankets, dishes, furniture. The kids from the workshop painted murals along the hallway, scenes of gardens, stars, and open doors. When it was finally done, I stood in the doorway of the first room, the afternoon light pouring across the floor. For a long time, I just breathed. This wasn't just a building. It was an answer. A year ago, I'd walked away from a house filled with betrayal. Now I stood inside one built from forgiveness. The opening day arrived on a bright Saturday morning. The whole town came out to see it. Neighbors, friends, volunteers. Ethan gave a short speech, his voice steady but full of emotion. "This home," he said, "is for anyone who's ever been made to feel like they don't belong. My mother taught me that real family isn't about blood. It's about who stands beside you when the world turns its back. He paused, looking at me. She disappeared once, but not to leave. She disappeared so we could find her strength again. And this home is her story, turned into a place. People clapped. Some cried. I stood still, my hands trembling, my heart both heavy and light. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't prepare anything. I just looked around and said, "If you walk through these doors, you're not a burden. You're not forgotten. You're seen. You're home." The crowd went quiet, then burst into applause. Afterward, as everyone mingled, an older woman approached me. She was in her late 60s, her hands calloused, her eyes gentle. "You don't know me," she said softly, "but I saw the article about this place in the paper. I lost my husband last year. My kids moved away. I didn't think I'd ever belong anywhere again until now." I took her hand. "You belong right here." Her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," I smiled. "No, my dear, thank you. You're why we built this." That night, after the last guest had gone, I stayed behind to tidy up. The building was quiet, except for the faint hum of the lights. I walked down the hallway, running my hand along the fresh paint, the walls still smelling faintly of wood and new beginnings. I stopped at one of the murals, a painting of a sunrise over the ocean. In the corner, the kids had signed their names in colorful letters. At the bottom, someone had written a quote I didn't recognize until I read it twice. "Build things that outlast your own hands." Daniel's words. The same ones Ethan had framed in his workshop. I closed my eyes. "You're still here," I whispered. "Everywhere." Ethan locked up and walked me to the car. The moonlight spilled across the bay, calm and clear. "Do you ever miss the old house?" he asked quietly. I thought about it. Sometimes, but not because of what it was, because of who I was in it. That woman had a lot to learn, but I'm grateful for her. She survived long enough to find this peace. He nodded, then smiled faintly. "You've always been stronger than you think." "Maybe," I said, "or maybe I just finally stopped being afraid to let go." We stood there for a while, the sound of waves filling the silence. Then he hugged me, tight and warm. "Dad would have loved this," he said. "He does," I replied. "He's been here all along." As the months passed, the Edwards Home for Healing became more than we dreamed. Women from neighboring towns came to stay. Some for a few weeks, some for longer. They gardened, cooked, painted, and shared stories under the stars. Laughter filled those halls again, the kind that comes from people who've seen darkness but choose light anyway. Every Friday evening, we gathered in the common room. I'd make tea and read letters from those who'd once lived there, thanking us for giving them hope. Some had found work, others had reunited with family. One woman even opened a small bakery in town, calling it Second Chances. Ethan would always smile and say, "You see, Mom? You didn't just change one story. You started 100 new ones." And every time he said it, I felt Daniel near, like the echo of a promise finally fulfilled. One evening, as I locked up the center, I noticed the first snowflakes of the season falling. I stepped outside and lifted my face to the sky, the cold air brushing against my cheeks. Across the street, the lights from the workshop glowed through the windows. Inside, the kids were still working, their laughter spilling out into the night. I whispered softly, "This is what we built, love. You, me, and him." Then I looked toward the stars, their light sharp against the winter sky, and smiled. Sometimes life doesn't give you what you ask for. It gives you what you're meant to build. And standing there, surrounded by everything I thought I'd lost, I realized I had built something far stronger than walls or roofs. I had built a legacy, one made of love, forgiveness, and the kind of strength that keeps growing, even after the storm has passed. The snow fell quietly, wrapping the world in white, and as I walked home through the stillness, every step felt like a prayer answered. The first real snowstorm of the season came in mid-December, heavy, quiet, and endless. By morning, the world outside my window looked untouched, every tree branch weighed down by white, every rooftop softened by frost. The town had gone still, as if holding its breath. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, watching the flakes swirl against the glass. The house was warm, the fire steady in the hearth. I loved mornings like this, the ones that made you pause, reflect, and remember that peace doesn't have to be loud to be powerful. Ethan called just after sunrise. "Mom, you up?" "Barely," I teased. It's a snow day. Aren't you supposed to be hibernating? He laughed. No rest for the busy. The center's pipes froze. I'm heading over to check them before they burst. You be careful driving, I said automatically. The roads are awful. I will, he promised. Want to come with me? Might need an extra pair of hands, or just your supervision, I smiled. You mean my moral support? That too, he said, chuckling. The world outside was blindingly white. My boots crunched through the snow as we made our way into town. The workshop and the healing home stood side by side now, their roofs gleaming under layers of frost. When I stepped inside, the air was cold, our breath visible. Ethan got right to work, crouched near the pipes with his toolkit. Remember when you couldn't even fix a squeaky hinge? I asked, wrapping my shawl tighter. He grinned. That was before I learned you can fix almost anything if you stop panicking long enough to try. That's true for more than just pipes, I said softly. He glanced up at me, smiling. You always know how to make everything sound profound. I laughed. That's what moms are for. Within an hour, the pipes were running again, the heat humming softly through the vents. We stood in the middle of the hallway, watching the steam curl from the radiators. Ethan turned to me. You know, this place doesn't feel like a project anymore. It feels alive. I nodded. That's because it is. Every person who's walked through here left a little piece of their heart behind. He smiled. You included. Especially me, I said, chuckling. That afternoon, we lit the fireplace in the common room. The women who stayed at the center gathered with us, knitting, reading, sipping hot cocoa. The air was thick with warmth and laughter. One woman, named Claire, was telling a story about her late husband. He used to wake me every morning just to see the sunrise, she said. I used to be annoyed by it. Now I'd give anything to see one more with him. I reached over, squeezing her hand. He'd be glad you're seeing them again, even if it's from here. She smiled faintly, her eyes shining. Ethan was sitting near the window, quietly watching the snow fall. The glow of the fire made his face look older, wiser somehow. It was moments like this when I saw not just my son, but the man life had carved him into. As evening settled, the sky turned a soft gray blue. The snow had stopped, leaving behind a calm so deep you could almost hear it breathe. We closed up the center and walked to my house, the snow crunching under our boots. Dinner? I asked. Ethan laughed. If it's your stew, always. Inside, I lit candles, the soft glow dancing across the room. While I cooked, Ethan set the table, humming to himself. It reminded me of when he was little, how he'd always hum while concentrating, how Daniel used to join in just to tease him. We ate in comfortable silence, the only sounds the clinking of spoons and the fire's quiet crackle. When we were done, I poured us both tea. I've been thinking, he said after a while, about the future. About you. Oh? I asked. Should I be worried? He smiled. Not at all. Just wondering if you'd ever consider moving closer to town. Maybe into the guest house next to the center. You'd still have your space, but you'd be part of everything. I looked at him, touched. You really don't have to worry about me, sweetheart. I'm not worried, he said softly. I just like knowing you're nearby. I paused, looking around my cozy home. It had held so much, grief, healing, laughter. It was filled with Daniel's spirit and my memories. But maybe it was time for a new chapter. I'll think about it, I said. That's all I ask. The next morning, the sun broke through the clouds. The snow glittered, untouched. I wrapped myself in my coat and walked down to the garden. The peace lily Noah had given me months ago was thriving inside, green and strong despite the cold. I ran my hand over its leaves, remembering every season it had survived, every storm, every frost. Somehow, it kept growing. So had we. That afternoon, I packed a small basket of cookies and tea and went to the center. A few of the women were sitting by the window, sewing. One of them, Martha, looked up and said, Miss Alice, we were just talking about you. Oh dear, I laughed. Should I be flattered or nervous? Flattered, she said. We were saying how this place feels different since you've been coming around more, like it has a heartbeat. My throat tightened. That's the kindest thing anyone said to me all week. She smiled. It's true. You make people believe in new beginnings. Later that evening, as I was about to leave, Ethan appeared at the door holding 2 mugs of cocoa. For the ride home, he said. We stepped outside together. The sky was clear and the stars burned bright above us. The whole town seemed to glow beneath the snow. Do you ever stop to think about how far we've come? He asked quietly. Every day, I said. He nodded. I used to think the worst day of our lives was that Christmas morning when everything fell apart. But now I see it was the start of everything we needed. I smiled faintly. Sometimes life breaks you so it can rebuild you stronger. He looked at me with a kind of reverence I wasn't used to. You know, Mom, you didn't just rebuild yourself. You rebuilt me. My eyes filled with tears. We rebuilt each other. As the days passed, I started helping at the center regularly, teaching small classes, gardening, baking, even letter writing. The women loved it. They said it made them feel useful again. One of them, Anna, asked me one afternoon, "How do you stay so calm, even after everything?" I thought for a moment, because I finally learned that peace isn't something you find, it's something you make, one choice at a time. She smiled. That's going on the wall. I laughed. You go ahead. And she did. The next week, there it was, painted across the entrance. Peace isn't found. It's made. Every time I walked past it, I felt Daniel there. By the time Christmas rolled around again, the center was fully alive. The women decorated it themselves, garlands, candles, and hand-sewn ornaments. Ethan built a huge wooden star to hang over the entrance. When the lights turned on that evening, the whole building glowed like a promise. Ethan came to stand beside me. You ready for another Christmas, Mom? I looked up at the glowing star. This one feels different. Better? Real, I said simply. This one feels real. The children from the workshop arrived to sing carols, their voices rising into the cold night air. Snow began to fall again, soft and slow. For a long moment, everything was still, just the sound of singing, the scent of pine, and the sight of joy reflected in every window. I turned to Ethan, my voice barely above a whisper. You did it, sweetheart. You turned pain into something beautiful. He shook his head. No, Mom. We did. And for the first time, I believed him completely. That night, as I walked home under the falling snow, I carried with me the feeling I had searched for my entire life. Not just peace, but belonging. Because forgiveness had made room for love again. And love, once it comes back to you, never leaves empty-handed. Inside, I lit a single candle and placed it on the windowsill. It flickered softly, glowing against the glass. Outside, the snow fell heavier, quieting the world once more. And I whispered to Daniel, to Ethan, to the house itself, we're finally home. The next morning was quiet. The snow from the night before still clung to the trees, glistening in the early light. Everything was hushed, peaceful. The kind of morning that felt like the world was pausing, just long enough for you to notice how beautiful it could be when it wasn't rushing. I sat at the kitchen table, coffee steaming in front of me, a small notebook open to a blank page. The candle I'd left on the windowsill had burned down to a stub, the wax pooled at its base. I didn't blow it out last night, I just let it fade on its own. Some things deserve to end quietly. As I looked out the window, I saw Ethan's truck pull up by the gate. He got out, waving, his breath visible in the cold air. I opened the door before he even knocked. Morning, Mom, he said, grinning. Thought I'd stop by before heading to the center. Come in, I said. The coffee's still hot. He stomped the snow off his boots and came inside, rubbing his hands together. You'd think after all these winters I'd be used to it. You've been saying that since you were 10, I teased. He laughed, sitting down across from me. Some things never change. No, I said softly, but some things change for the better. He nodded, smiling. That's true. We sat for a while, sipping coffee in comfortable silence. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, scattering light across the snow. Do you remember, I said, the Christmas morning when you gave me that piggy bank? He looked up, startled, then chuckled nervously. I was hoping we'd never bring that up again. Oh, I remember it, I said with a smile. Every detail, the hurt, the humiliation. But now, when I think of it, I don't feel pain anymore. I feel gratitude. He frowned slightly. Gratitude? Yes, I said. Because that morning pushed us both to face the truth about what our lives had become. It tore everything open, and it let the light in. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said softly, You always find a way to turn pain into something good. No, I said, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. Life does that. I just finally stopped fighting it. Later that day, we drove to the Edwards home for healing. The building shimmered under the sunlight, its windows glowing. The women inside were preparing for their winter gathering, an event they had planned themselves. Tables filled the hall, decorated with pine cones, candles, and handmade ornaments. The air smelled like cinnamon and fresh bread. When we walked in, the room erupted in greetings. "Miss Alice! Mr. Ethan!" I smiled and hugged them, one by one. These women weren't just residents anymore. They were family. Every face told a story: loss, resilience, rebirth. Claire, the widow who had once spoken of missing sunrises, handed me a small gift wrapped in paper. "For you," she said shyly. I opened it carefully. Inside was a simple wooden ornament, a heart carved by hand. On it were the words, "You built this with love." I held it to my chest, unable to speak. After the gathering, Ethan and I walked outside. The air was crisp, the sky painted with streaks of pink and gold. "You know," he said, "this place, these people, they've changed me." I smiled. "They've changed us both." He looked toward the horizon, his voice softer now. "I used to think forgiveness was something you gave to someone else, but I think maybe it's something you give to yourself." I nodded. "That's exactly what it is." We stood there for a moment, watching the sun dip lower. Snowflakes began to fall again, catching the last of the light as they drifted down. Ethan turned to me. "You ever think about what comes next?" I laughed softly. "At my age, every day feels like a gift, so I try not to think too far ahead." He smiled. "Fair enough." But as we walked back to the truck, I thought about it. The what's next. Not in a sad way, but in the kind of way that feels like closing the last page of a well-loved book. I had built what needed to be built. I had forgiven what needed forgiving. The rest would take care of itself. That night, the town was quiet again. I lit a new candle and set it beside the old one's stub. The flame flickered to life. Small, but steady. On the table beside it sat the wooden heart Claire had given me. I turned it over in my hand, tracing the words carved into it. "You built this with love." It wasn't just about the home or the workshop. It was about Ethan, about Daniel, about the pieces of my life that had fallen apart only to come back together stronger than before. I thought of Riley, somewhere out there, starting her own new life. I hoped she had found peace too. We were all part of the same circle. After all, each of us learning that redemption doesn't come through grand gestures, but through small, quiet choices made every day. The next morning, I woke to a golden sunrise. The snow glittered outside, untouched again, as if the world had reset itself overnight. I brewed a pot of coffee and stepped out onto the porch. The air was cold but sweet. In the distance, I could see the roof of the healing home, the smoke rising gently from its chimney. And then something caught my eye. Perched on the edge of the old birdhouse, a robin. The same kind of bird that used to sing outside Daniel's window every spring. It tilted its head, chirped once, and flew off into the morning sky. I smiled. Sometimes the universe speaks softly, but it always speaks. Later that week, Ethan came by with a box of letters, thank you notes from the women at the center. "They wanted you to have these," he said. I opened one at random. "Miss Alice, you reminded me that life doesn't end when everything falls apart. It begins when you decide to build again." My eyes blurred as I read it. I closed the box and set it beside the candle. "I think," I said quietly, "we did good, didn't we?" Ethan smiled. "No, Mom, you did great." He kissed my forehead, then stood to leave. "I'll see you tomorrow." After he left, I sat for a long while, the silence wrapping around me like a blanket. I looked at the window, at the snow, at the flames still burning, and I whispered, almost to myself, "Thank you for all of it." That night, I dreamt of Daniel. He was standing in the garden, sunlight streaming through the trees. He turned to me and smiled, the same smile he'd had on our wedding day. "You did it, Alice," he said. "You gave them everything you had, and they gave it back." I reached for his hand, and in that moment, I felt nothing but warmth. When I woke, the dream lingered, not in sadness, but in peace. I rose, opened the curtains, and let the light flood in. The years would move on, as they always do. Seasons would change, the garden would bloom and fade again. Ethan would continue his work, the healing home would welcome more souls, and my story, our story, would live quietly within its walls. Because the best endings aren't really endings at all. They're beginnings disguised as rest. And as I stood by the window one last time, watching the sunlight spill across the snow, I whispered the only words that truly mattered, "I'm home." The world outside glowed golden and still, and inside everything was finally completely at peace.